everyone, and welcome to the Go to Market 10X podcast. Very excited to have Stephen here today, who's a friend from business school, a absolute expert on all things RevOps, and also a customer of Focus. So I'm super excited for this conversation. Oh yes, I'm glad you're excited too, Stephen. For the who haven't been here before, this is an opportunity to ask experts like Steven any of your burning questions on anything go to market. So very excited for this conversation. Steven, maybe we can kick off. Give me the intro. Who are you?
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for having me, Alexa. It's great to see you. Thanks everyone for joining. I lead go-to-market strategy and operations at Zip. Zip is a agentic AI procurement software business founded in 2020, helping large Global 2000, Fortune 500 companies solve their procurement challenges. And I joined the company back in February to lead go-to-market strategy and ops, which is really everything sales, customer marketing operations, business systems, go-to-market analytics, and have been in the kind of broader sales ops, RevOps space for 5.5 years now.
Amazing. Thank you, Steven. So actually, something that is very interesting about you that I want to start with is that your background is not sales ops forever and ever. You actually made a pivot in your career, which I don't know if I know anyone with your same story as you. So can you go a little bit deeper of how this started, where you started your career, and
Yeah.
and then how you decided to make this change?
Yeah, totally. Yes, I started off my career in investment banking. I did a 2-year analyst program. I was on the power and utilities team. I spent a lot of my time thinking about coal plants and natural gas plants, and really used that as a way to kind of start my career. And that I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew that that was a great way to build a strong technical toolkit, start to think about businesses end to end, both from a strategy standpoint, but also like what are the metrics that really matter. And I kept down that path for a number of years after investment banking. I did credit investing for a number of years, kind of before private credit was as big as it is today, and had it really an incredible experience. Was at Blackstone, did that for 3 years. But I think throughout those 5 years in the finance and investing space, like was pretty confident that I just wanted to be an operator at some point, had this hunger and this interest in what would it be like to be at a company building something, being part of a really high functioning team that was driving impact across an organization. And so that always piqued my interest. It was always something that I wanted to explore, um, which is why I then went to business school, which is where we met, and was an incredible experience overall, just to kind of open my eyes to what different operating paths were out there. Candidly, RevOps was like not on the list at all. So back in like 2018, 2019, I knew probably one person who had been in sales ops, and that person was you. Like I didn't know anyone who had been in the space, and um, and so when the first opportunity came up for a sales operations role post business school, I was intrigued, but I was like, is this actually as strategic of a function as I think it could be? And kind of took the leap and have been very pleasantly surprised in the path that it has set me down.
Let's go into that, how strategic of a function it is. Because when I started in sales ops, there was a mix. There was some folks on my team that were very execution, tactical, very few with this strategic lens. And I think RevOps has become more strategic over the last few years.
Yeah.
And I still think that people, when we're in business school, no one says like, RevOps is the strategic function I want to go into, besides maybe you and me. People want to go into venture capital, or they want to start a company, or they want to be a product manager because they think it's strategic. So prove them wrong. Why is RevOps more strategic?
Yeah. I think I think there's two like big reasons why I think about it as the most strategic function, and we can kind of go from there. But number one, what you will often hear from founders or kind of early business hires is that typically they came around to hiring RevOps too late. It was post product market fit, but it was also maybe post scaling up the go to market engine. And what you realize once you start to scale up the go to market engine is that unless you really have rigor and structure around your processes, your systems, your tooling, but also like the strategic viewpoint of how can we grow a sales org sustainably? What are the different functions we need? How do we incentivize those functions the right way? You can actually really inhibit growth. And so RevOps is this strategic function that can be the accelerant. It can be like the fuel on the go-to-market fire, or it can really be this thing that causes slowdown and friction and can really, stymie those growth plans. So I think that's one. It's strategic just from a how do you build a business and like when is the right time to invest in this function. What I think is also unique about RevOps and what I think has changed over the past, call it 4 or 5 years, is RevOps is increasingly becoming what I view as the COO to the sales leader, the customer leader, the marketing leader, really acting as the both strategic thought partner to that leader, but also the operational partner to help them execute on that vision. And so because RevOps is kind of elevated up to the level of partnership with sales leader or with go-to-market leader, it is a much more proactive function. It is much more at the forefront of how go-to-market strategy is set versus, hey, we are here to kind of like tactically respond to questions or analytics and that's all very important, right? But I think the evolution over the past couple of years has almost been pulling RevOps like further up the stack in an organization to bring it, more in line with earlier stage strategic decision making.
It's, can we go let's I love this, and I totally agree with this. If I said, "Steven, no buzzwords. Tell me what strategic initiatives mean." Like, what is being strategic in RevOps? Not that you were using buzzwords, but I was mean basic, like, what is happening in the world of RevOps?
Yeah, I'll try. I'll try. It's hard. So again, I think it comes back to like when is RevOps part of the conversation? And so for example, right, um, the conversation is very different if it is late in Q4 and RevOps or sales ops is getting pulled in to say, hey, we have this is the plan that we've largely aligned on for next year. Here's how we, and by we, it's like execs or finance or
Mhm.
whatever the team may be. This is how we're thinking about hiring for next year. Like go figure out like where to put these people. That is a very different ask than 6 months earlier having the conversation with the sales leaders around like we have a growth target that we need to get to next year for the company overall. What are the levers that we think we have at our disposal today to actually go execute on those? And so this is something that I'm working with our head of sales on now at Zip. And hey, if we just were to like clean sheet what our sales org looks like next year from a segmentation standpoint, not that we're going to do this, but like what would it look like? What would the first principles approach be in terms of the pockets of the market that we would go attack? Do we think that we've segmented the business the right way? Do we think that there are actually ways that we should like resegment or verticalize or go after new markets differently? And that is a much more strategic conversation to have, which then, of course, feeds into that downstream around territories and quotas and team design. But RevOps is part of those earlier conversations. I think the most high functioning RevOps teams have those really tight connections with their go to market leaders, so that those conversations are happening organically on like a weekly or a biweekly basis versus kind of a set cadence as planning cycle approaches.
Do you think your finance background helped you with this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I certainly have benefited from it. And I think one of the things that I think becomes more and more important in these high functioning RevOps teams is having a team that is a bit of a Swiss Army knife when it comes to not just like the projects they can take on, but having a real like analytical foundation, having that toolkit so that they can go be deployed as leads across the organization independently. I'm a big believer that the way that you make RevOps a more strategic function is that you hire individuals. They don't have to be very senior. They can be like 2, 3, 4 years out of school, but who have the curiosity to kind of figure out what's going on in the sales organization. A analytical toolkit that allows them to be fairly self-sufficient in really understanding the business metrics and working closely with the sales partner to kind of uncover those metrics. And then a bias for action in driving outcomes with the sales leader. You arm each of your go-to-market leaders with an individual like that. And you can really decentralize and speed up the RevOps
Mhm.
function so that these sales teams can run faster and more independently. And I think that's what my finance background did give me is that analytical toolkit and that comfort with numbers and metrics and how to kind of put together not just a thoughtful analysis, but then like what are the insights from that are really important in order to drive business outcome.
It is a good point. It's very similar to my experience, like you said, having a few years out of college. I did 2.5 years of consulting, went into RevOps, and the things that I had were the strategic thinking and analytical mindset and first principles, but I had to learn everything about the RevOps function, not even that, just how a B2B company works.
Right.
For you, what was the learning curve and how did you get ramped up on RevOps with that as a background?
Yeah. Well, I guess to go back to your question on like the finance background, one of the things that worked out really well for me is when I first started in RevOps, I was at a company called Verkada. I was an early sales ops employee there, and the functions that I was able to take on right away really played to my strengths. They were really around. I led our sales compensation team for a number of years. I was very closely tied into sales planning and sales finance, and I think that made sense given my background. I think where the learning curve was a little bit more challenging was around like all things tooling in sales ops, right? I mean, it's even crazier now with the landscape, but even back then, what are all these tools? How do they all fit together? The data structures that I was working within. I think when you come from a finance background, you're very accustomed to working with clean data because often you're working with data that is,
Yeah.
you know, investor ready or strategic acquirer ready. That is not that's obviously not the case in the RevOps landscape. And so I think learning how to um, just operate in that environment was challenging. I think the other area that was a bit of a steeper learning curve was recognizing that, when you're in an operating environment, you're dealing with all of these different teams that have competing priorities. And in a finance organization, there are very intense demands on everybody on a deal team, but everybody's generally rowing in the same direction. The minute you step into an operator role and you're in a cross-functional seat, you have to juggle all these different balls in the air and also recognize that everybody else is juggling their own balls. And if you really want to work and partner with somebody closely, um, you need to kind of sell them on the projects that you're working with. Uh, and I credit my ability to kind of get up that learning curve with building relationships early on. Like, I think one of the things that has always served me well in my career is having really strong relationships with the people that I work with and investing in those relationships. That's also what makes work much more enjoyable. And I think, when you kind of build those relationships and people see you as like a human and a partner to work with, then, kind of getting aligned on priorities becomes much easier.
It is it's a great point that I resonate with that I never thought about when you get into the RevOps world from either consulting or banking or PE, whatever that is. Um, Instead of having kind of one main stakeholder and a couple people working towards the same goal, you're then working with finance and marketing and sales and customer success, and it's way harder to prioritize. And something else you said was around building relationships, having a great team. I know at Verkada, or maybe I'm making this up, but I know at Verkada you hired a lot of people that were maybe the me profile back in whatever 2015, where it was a couple years of consulting, go into RevOps. Um, is that what you look for, or do you look for other types of people? Like for example, I've actually talked to a lot of salespeople that are trying to pivot into sales ops. So would you do that? Would you take a bet on someone in that field, or do you require them to have this kind of professional service or operational background?
Yeah, I mean, my bias is what I know, which is I know that folks that come from that professional services background can fit certain roles really, really well. And when I think of a certain role, I think of that, the lead for a division. Hey, I know that you can kind of go off and be really independent on your own and like work with this sales leader to figure out everything from the planning side of the business, the quota setting side of the business, maybe some of the operational execution, where I think there is a lot of potential demand for someone that has more of the sales acumen and certainly like understanding of sales systems is, this growing go to market engineering function. I was actually talking to my head of business systems yesterday, and we are about to launch this role, our founding go to market engineer at Zip. And so, a little plug for the folks who are listening in case they're interested to look out for that rec.
You should work for Steven.
Come join us. But I think he brought up a good point, which is for that role, rather than defaulting to, hey, someone has to have like a super, super technical background, this is actually a great role for someone who, of course, has a technical bent, but who really understands sales and the sales motion and like intimately understands the pain that sellers can go through when working across a lot of disparate prospecting tools and dealing with bad data. And so one of the profiles that we are going to look for as part of this is someone who has more of that sales background, who has demonstrated some technical acumen or experience in their profile, but is like intimately understands the seller experience and has done that before.
It's That's great that you're thinking through that, and I've met some incredible sellers that are very data driven, especially sales leaders too, where they do is think in data inputs, outputs, and that translates really well to the sales officer RevOps role. And I actually think it can make you stand out in ways because you have this level of empathy for the other person's job. So, it's interesting. So, hearing it back from you, there's various different personas or types of backgrounds that you would hire for these roles.
Totally. And I think it also depends on the stage of company, right? Like at Verkada, by the time I left, the RevOps team had grown from when I joined, call it, 10 to 15 folks to by the end, 70 to 90, depending on whether you counted our entire business systems team in that number. Um, Whereas at Zip today, when I joined earlier this year, our entire go to market strategy and ops team was four. We will be 10 by the end of the quarter. And I think the when you are dealing with such a small team, and frankly, I mentioned earlier that idea of like, is RevOps or go to market ops an accelerant or a bit of a governor? I think at the beginning of the year, we were more in governor mode. We just didn't
Mm.
have the baseline resources to like really accelerate growth within the go to market org. And I think we've done a great job like building out that base of kind of rock stars on the team who can fit into a bunch of these different functions, whether it's business systems or go to market analytics or various support for our different sales divisions. But I think having an earlier stage team means that there's actually a lot more value you can derive out of someone who has seen the game before, who can bring their different level of expertise of, hey, Zip is, going to double its go to market org this year. Well, when I was at XYZ Co, we did the same thing. And, here's the tooling that we thought about, or here's what broke and how we fixed it and helping us get ahead of that curve. So depending on the size of the org, I think the profile can really differ. And I also think that, depending on what you or, what a candidate is looking for out of the role, going to a larger organization that has more of like a training program around RevOps can be really powerful. It can also be super powerful to get thrown into the deep end at an early stage company. I think a lot of it depends on like the individual and how they like to learn and where they thrive.
I love this framing of governor versus accelerant. Is that what you said?
Yeah, yeah.
How do you know if you're stuck in governor mode and you'd need to get into accelerant?
It's a good question. A lot of angry slacks. Probably not. That's probably not a bad heuristic. No, I think when you get, I'd say just like the baseline, uh, kind of rev ops or go to market ops, um, like table stakes requirements in place, right? This is what we spent a lot of the past couple of months working on. Like, do we have the right dashboarding and reporting in place just so our leaders are reading off of the same sheet of music as our executives? Like, what are the metrics that really matter? Do we have those in place? Do we have a very clear operating rhythm with our sales leaders and our sales teams to review those metrics? Do we speak the same language when it comes to forecasting? Like, this is all the like 101 stuff that can sound very basic, but is so important to nail and to get right. And so I think if you get that 101 level in place, then you can start to think a little bit more about okay, what are the projects that we can take on that now allow us to move even faster in a certain area of the business? And so one of the things that we're thinking about a lot right now, which I know a lot of folks, I'm sure on this call and broadly in the space are, is, how can we use the various AI tools that are out there to, improve prospecting efficiency for our reps and our customers, really, when we think about the sales org, right? And so obviously working with you, working with Pocus, super excited about that on the prospecting side. But also, from a data enrichment standpoint, like, can we rip out some of these legacy providers and use a much more customizable tool like a Clay, to kind of accelerate the level of high quality data and contacts that our sales reps are working with? It shouldn't be a first get the table stakes in C or in kind of in line and then move to this accelerate view. But I think depending on the like maturity of the organization that you step into, you gotta nail that foundation first before you can get too aggressive or creative on some of the accelerate work streams.
It's I like that framework. I'm gonna copy that, Stephen.
Well,
I'm inspired by it. That's a good one. I think a lot of organizations can learn from that, and a lot too many are in firefighting mode on the RevOps side. And I think it's hard to get out of that mode into the strategic mode. But once you do, it unlocks a lot.
totally. And that's where, I think team design and alignment becomes super important. So this embedded model that I've mentioned a couple of times, like really what that looks like is having almost like a hub and spoke RevOps team design where you've got a couple of folks that are, quote unquote centralized. And this is a kind of a design framework that we were running at Verkada, which I brought over to Zip, which is a couple of folks that are centralized that are running like centralized analytics, centralized business systems, centralized data enrichment. But then you have a spoke model where you have leads that are working with each of the individual sales division to partner really, really closely with those leaders as their almost front door into the RevOps organization. The leader knows who they need to go to. They've got one person that they can go to for all their questions, and that person can either help them action them on the ground floor quickly or knows who to go to internally in order to make it happen. And if you take that approach with your go to market leaders, the RevOps team gets pulled into many, many more conversations that are strategic in nature or they're simply neutral, but they're gathering context on what's super important to that part of the sales organization, which allows them and then the broader RevOps organization to be more proactive to the needs and demands of those business units rather than waiting for them to kind of come up when something is urgently burning.
Stephen, final question. Who should go into RevOps and who should not?
Yeah, love the question. So you know, one of the things I've been most pleasantly surprised about with my career journey into RevOps, and the reason why I love it, and, this is where I am making my career, is I think going into a revenue operations role is where you really learn how to run a company. There's the classic line that if you work at a startup, you either build stuff or you sell stuff. And if you want to be an operator, in my opinion, there is no better seat to sit in than the RevOps or the go-to-market ops seat, which aligns you so closely with the revenue of an organization. Because when you sit at the revenue, you become indispensable. It's that business, right? It's very rare that an organization is going to look to axe or cut RevOps when times get tough because selling more and driving more revenue is what allows organizations to thrive and what allows them to kind of get out of tougher macroeconomic conditions. Um, you also get tied in. You become this like nexus or this node that connects all of the different functions, not just within the revenue organization. So marketing, customer, sales, but also recruiting. Product comes to go to market ops as a way to get into the sales organization. Finance and rev and go to market ops obviously become really closely entwined. So to sit in the go to market ops org means that you get purview into all of those different functions and often are quarterbacking initiatives that impact all of those different functions. So in my opinion, there's no better place to learn how to actually run an organization holistically than sitting in the go-to-market ops seat.
And who shouldn't go into RevOps?
Who shouldn't go? I think that, there is always going to be chaos in a fast. This is a little bit biased by the fast growing kind of SaaS company background, but I think in a RevOps organization, like you have to be incredibly flexible. You have to prepare for things to break all the time, and you have to be really comfortable like setting your strategic priorities, but knowing that those strategic priorities may often get knocked around quite a bit by changes in the sales organization, changes in overall company kind of strategy. And so I think being incredibly flexible is critical. And for folks that want um, more structure to their day to day, and I think a little bit more predictability in terms of like what it's going to look like 6 months from now or 12 months from now. The revenue organization can be a really challenging place to be. So it's just what you're looking for in terms of your day to day.
Stephen, thank you for being here. I could talk to you all day. You are phenomenal. Such an incredible ops leader, and I love your story. Once this podcast goes live, I'm sending this to all our business school friends that wanted to go into VC or product and tell them they're all making major mistakes because they're not going into RevOps. So thank you for being here, Stephen.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Alexa. This was a lot of fun.
Talk to you soon.
All right. See ya.